Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes, and today we will be diving into an insightful discussion on the Parliament clashes taking place in the United Kingdom. British lawmakers on Wednesday voted against a bill by the opposition Conservative Party demanding an inquiry into the Grooming Gangs scandal. The development led to a political slugfest between the Conservative Party and the ruling Labour Party in the House of Commons. However, Sir Keir Starmer government alleged that the opposition was trying to kill the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill by putting forward an amendment that would force the national inquiry. As per the UK government, the amendment would block the bill. A lengthy and fierce debate took place in the House of Commons during Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. The House witnessed a clash between the UK Prime Minister and Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch. The bill reportedly includes measures focusing on more stern rules regarding homeschooling and protecting children. However, the amendment was rejected by 364 to 111 votes. Notably, the majority mark was 253. Out of the total votes polled in favour of the motion, 101 were from the Conservatives. We are joined by four guests today. We have Adit Kutara, founding member of the Indic Society. We have Raymond Vickery, he's a former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce coming from Washington. We have Arina Sukuman, human rights and national security lawyer and editor-chief in the Washington Outsider. And finally, we have Henry Bolton, a former diplomat, live from London. Henry Bolton, I would like to start with you. This case we have seen rumbling on now for the past week, but this is a historical case that has caused a lot of controversy, has caused a previous investigation. It's been brought back into the spotlight, but it's really shining a light on the victims who are now much older, but also a continuation of similar crimes that are happening in the United Kingdom. In terms of a perception from the United Kingdom, it seems to be split, but what's your understanding in the UK of what the current consensus is now surrounding this bill, but the topic as a whole?
Well, I think the national consensus, first of all, from the general public, is one of great concern. Obviously, as you've indicated, the whole thing has taken a higher profile in the public domain, in the media and so on. That's been assisted by Elon Musk's comments. Whether you agree with him or whether you don't, it's given the whole topic a higher profile. And indeed, there was this request from one of the councils, from Oldham Council, that the government launch a nationwide investigation into the phenomenon of what's predominantly Pakistani Muslim men involved in mass gangs committing rape of underage children. And Oldham Council were told that by the government that the government was not going to do this. They were not going to launch such an investigation, and on the basis that prior investigations had taken place and so on. Yes, prior investigations had taken place, inquiries and so on. However, none of them were national and comprehensive in their nature. If you cannot define the root causes, this has been going on for decades. How has this been? How did it become an issue in a country with what we like to think is a pretty robust rule of law and justice system as we've got, values-based society and so on? Is there a role, has multiculturalism as an issue had a role to play there? How is it that public officials, whether it's politicians, civil servants, police officers, welfare workers, how is it that we have got ourselves into a situation where such people working in such organisations as those, are prepared to turn a blind eye, look the other way, and thereby facilitate the continuation of this abhorrent behaviour and this criminality? How has that all happened? Now, if we can't understand all of those issues, the causes and so on, how it's come about, then there is no way that the government or any other agency can guarantee, can sort of gain the trust and credibility of the British public in saying that it's no longer taking place or that it won't happen again in future. And that's the problem here. And now that Keir Starmer, and you referred to the vote yesterday in the House of Commons, he ordered his members of Parliament, it's quite bizarre, he ordered all of his members of Parliament to vote against this amendment from the Conservatives requiring such an investigation, whilst himself and most of his cabinet abstained. It was quite bizarre. But whether rightly or wrongly, that creates the impression of a continued cover-up, because there's already a suspicion that because we've got a large number of Labour MPs, members of Parliament, who are from the community that is predominantly involved in this, the Pakistani Muslim community, and because the fact of the matter is that a lot of the Labour MPs have relied on the Muslim vote, that Labour is continuing, perpetuating what is a cover-up, because they haven't got the moral integrity and courage to face the issue head on, and thereby they're letting the country down. So there are all these problems. It's a complex issue, and I don't think in my, I'm 61, but let's say 50 years of sort of cognizant sort of recollection of these things, that I don't think we have seen this much internal division across the country on an issue of this sort at all. It is the tension cannot, I don't think, be underestimated. But Labour has this massive majority, and it's very, very difficult. This vote yesterday was never going to be won by the Conservative opposition, and it's very, very difficult to see how any traction can be made on this. We'll have to see.
Yes, and
one point I'd like to make, they're referred in the mainstream media here, and by a lot of politicians and commentators, as Asian grooming gangs. This is not a phenomenon of Asians. This is almost exclusively Pakistani Muslim men. And I don't think it's right to label Indians or Indonesians or Hong Kong Chinese or anybody else who are all Asians as bundle them all into this. If we can't define the problem properly, we're not going to be able to treat it correctly.
yes, and of course, looking at the majority of the people who were caught and the perpetrators in these grooming gangs, this has also raised questions amongst the Muslim community. This is a small proportion, and there is a debate also that without an investigation, it's looking at a wider Muslim population and potentially tarnishing everybody with the same brush. But moving back to the victims specifically, Adit Qatari, my apologies, we're looking at victims and vulnerable people, but the argument from Labour is that any potential investigation that might take 5 or 10 years at a stretch could impact the bill that they're introducing, which we know, of course, is there to safeguard children in the wake of the Sarah Sharif murder, a 10-year-old girl. They're looking to bring in new legislation. So do you understand where the Labour Party are coming from in looking at moving forward, or do you think that both can happen together? And if so, what would be the outcome, do you think, in that situation?
Well, I understand where the Labour Party is coming from Aylesbury to Birmingham, Blackburn, Birmingham, Bristol, Cardiff, Coventry. All of these places are basically Labour-held councils. That's where the problem is. The government is conveniently hiding behind, methodologies and data collection from previous investigations that were held. And my specific jibe is towards the 2020 Home Office report, which is an absolute, utter, it's a devastation of what one would describe as a report within something as serious as this. And they're basically hiding behind the methodology. In 2008, Gordon Brown sent a notification to all of his police officers. I think Henry may recall this. Do not prosecute these rape gangs because the children have made a lifestyle choice. In 2017, Nasha, a Labour MP, again comes out and says, for the sake of diversity, these abused girls need to shut up. I mean, that's the kind of complicitness that we see right to the top level. So the rot has basically gone absolutely to the top level, which is why they are so insufficient, and they lack a complete understanding of ground level politics at this point, and are thus not being able to provide the right kind of reassurances to the British public. People who have children, for instances. I've got a 2-year-old, and I'm not completely assured that this government has my interest or my child's interest in place at this point, which is why they are sort of indulging in all of these kind of political shenanigans. They are using multiculturalism as an intellectual cover fire to basically hide all of the rot within the system. And ultimately, who have they failed? They've basically failed the British public, and they are looking at electoral politics at the end of the day. So that is the end game. 100 out of the 600 constituencies in British politics is basically dominated by the so-called Muslim vote, and that is what they're trying to dominate, and that is what they're basically trying to control.
I want to look at that political debate and the political divide that this conversation has led to. We're looking, of course, at a Conservative Party that is now run by Kemi Badenoch, that is coming off arguably their worst political defeat in living memory. In terms of them choosing this as a topic to use in debates against the Labour Party, the Labour's response is that this wasn't being raised when they were in power, calling out Kemi Badenoch for not raising it during her time in the cabinet. Irina Tsukaman, coming to you in terms of this, do you think that this is opportunistic from the Conservative Party, or do you think now that the issue has been raised, they're looking to get to a point where a discussion is had and more knowledge is put out there in terms of the public understanding, but also so the certain bodies can put into place what they need to stop this happening in the future?
So much. I appreciate the question, because the reality is quite complex. The underlying issue, without a question, is real. And we have seen the evidence, and the media in the UK has covered it quite well in the past. And it is unfortunate that the many Conservative and Labour governments have failed to address this issue. And unfortunately, the fact that it takes a polarizing South African billionaire to raise its profile in the news for entirely self-serving reasons and in an entirely inappropriate way doesn't help matters, in my opinion. I think it creates unnecessary polarization that is unlikely to bring justice to the victims, because the Labour will rightfully dismiss his comments as political interference. The Labour will use the argument to claim that this is someone merely seeking to create an internal distraction, that he has no right to call on the king to dissolve the parliament, and all of these issues are going to be used to try to discredit the substantive underlying concern that the Labour Party has failed in governance, and it has failed the victims, and it has continued to promote excessively multicultural is not even the word for it, I would say, because multiculturalism implies the blending of cultures towards something positive. This is quite frankly a cover-up of sex scandals by particular subgroups, not even entire groups, a subculture of violence, a subculture of derogatory ideology. This is a catering to extremism, and this is how it should be covered. Conservatives, on the other hand, are falling into the same trap. Instead of being consistent and principled from the beginning in covering this issue, in bringing it to public light, they're only now emerging to hang on to Elon Musk's coattails and trying to push it as a political argument to downplay Labour, and it will be seen as such. The problem with this polarizing handling of the issue is that it will not engage the wider public as much as people would like, and the only political outcome is that it will not help Conservatives. It will help people like Nigel Farage, or even individuals who are worse than Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, and all of these groups who are far better at manipulating the situation than the Conservatives. Who it will not help with is the victims, because what I'm not hearing in this debate between either side, I'm hearing a lot about public inquiries, which Labour is foolishly downplaying, raising a question of what they have to hide, and what they have to hide is their own bad and failed policies. But what we're not hearing is a comprehensive plan on how this should be handled in a way that addresses the actual problem. What is the solution to the Pakistani gangs and other Islamist groups that have attained normalization in the UK society. We're not hearing about mechanisms to protect the children. We're not asking how so many children could have fallen victims to these scandals. Where were the cultural institutions watching out for their welfare? How were they manipulated into becoming victims of gangs of rapists on the streets? This is not a normal phenomenon. It's a huge scandal because there are so many failings. And yes, the Pakistani gangs are directly at fault for this, but so are other sectors of society which have failed to protect these children along the way.
Yes,
So
we're going to touch on that, Irina. Apologies to interrupt there. We're going to come back and look at what can be done and what has been done according to officials in the United Kingdom. But you mentioned Elon Musk there, and he is a figure which has single-handedly almost sparked this debate and brought this conversation back into the public eye. Raymond Vickery, thank you for waiting. Why do you think Elon Musk has decided to become so embroiled and so opinionated on British politics during a time when his close ally, the President-elect Donald Trump, is days away from his inauguration?
Well, thanks very much, Joshua, for having me. I think this is a very salient point and important point for Elon Musk, who obviously is now very close to the president-elect, to be embroiled in this raises serious questions about the manipulation of race and religion for political ends. And I would point out that Mr. Musk's involvement in the UK situation is not a one-off kind of involvement. Elon Musk has been involved with Germany, Scotland, Norway, France, always on the side of trying to whip up racial and religious animosity under the guise that it's just free speech. That is very concerning, particularly when you have a president-elect who got his start in politics by railing against African-American young men, the Central Park Five, as supposed rapists, and has been using that in what we call in the United States a dog whistle kind of a way. That means something that supporters understand that others don't. So this is very concerning, and I think it's important to try to tone down the rhetoric and the emotion. Sure, we all want to have what the facts are, and we want to call things by their own name rather than obfuscate the thing. But what Elon Musk has done here virtually single-handedly is to whip up these kinds of controversies, not only in the United States, but across Europe. I recall back when we had the controversy in 2017 here about taking down Confederate statues, how he told descendants of Robert E. Lee that watch out, they're coming for you, they want to obliterate you out. Those aren't the exact words, but those are the kinds of words he used. And so I would hope that people would step back and try to be more logical about it rather than feeding into this narrative that Elon Musk has put forward. He should know better, coming from South Africa as he does originally, what the very harmful consequences are of harping on the race and religion aspects of it. We've seen that movie before, if you will, in the run-up to World War II, and unfortunately it's gaining purchase all around the world, and this is very concerning for us here in the United States to see Mr. Musk reaching out in the United Kingdom and across Europe and indeed across the world to try to whip up this kind of concern.
Henry Bolton, we are looking at grooming gangs, and it's a sort of crime that equates to around 3% of child sexual crimes within the UK. Police officers have also said, senior police officers working within this department have said that the changes that have been made since 2014, since the previous review into this sort of crime, since the Rotherham grooming gang scandal, they say things have changed. But with this being brought back into the public eye, do you think that needs to go further?
And I think the nation does. Look, the fact of the matter is that there has not been a national inquiry or investigation into this phenomenon, a phenomenon that has been going on for 30 plus years, and that public servants and officials from the highest levels of government all the way down to the lowest levels of the police and welfare services and so on have turned a blind eye to, because they're in fear of upsetting the sort of multicultural apple cart. And I'm sorry, Raymond Vickery, I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, you know, whilst this is I think covered the UK in shame, I am embarrassed that this is being discussed internationally, our failings to protect our young girls and our failings to enforce the rule of law, despite knowing that crimes are being committed. It is shameful. But on the other hand, we are still, I think, a fairly sober nation. We have extremists on all sides, whether they be religious or whether they be political or whatever they may be. But the reality is that the nation, it doesn't need Elon Musk to tell it to be concerned that specifically Pakistani Muslim men have been in a networked, organised, not ad hoc, random way, in a networked, organised manner, conducting a deliberate, pre-planned campaign of targeting vulnerable girls and white British girls. There's a race element in this as well, that we don't need to be told to be concerned about that. We are. And we also know that if you don't define the problem specifically, if you say, well, this is a general problem, it's a generic problem in society, which it is not, but if you try to cover up the sort of race angle of it and the cultural angle of it, then you're not going to be able to design the right sort of response to it, whether that's be, you know, race relations or anything else. And, you know, I spent 2.5 years alongside the US Marines in Helmand in Afghanistan. You know, down there, they have a different culture, and I don't need to judge it. It is simply very, very different. And when you import large numbers of men from such a culture, as we have done, and we're talking sort of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men, without any attempt whatsoever to integrate them into our society, to educate them as to our rules, our social norms and so on, then you are going to have a problem. That is not racist to say that. That is simply part of the origin of this. And it would be wrong to say that Elon Musk is whipping up some sort of racial tension on it. The racial tension in this comes from the failure of the British authorities to act, and the fact that it certainly looks like, that's why we need the inquiry, it looks like many of them have been complicit in covering that up. So there is it's a complex matter, and yes, Elon Musk has helped to bring it to the fore. I'm very pleased about that. I myself do not like to see political involvement, sort of, you know, the sale of political influence or power to people who've got the wealth to buy it. There's an argument around that. There's a whole discussion around that, particularly interference in other countries. Absolutely there is. But in this case, we don't need anybody from outside to tell us the problem, but we have had somebody help us to highlight it.
Henry Bolton, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We are unfortunately out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Also, thank you to Irina Sukerman. Thank you very much, Raymond Vickery. And also thank you, Adit Kutari. As the debate continues to rage on in the United Kingdom, in Europe and across the world over such issues, we will, of course, continue to bring you all of the latest news updates. you.